Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to our conversation today on supporting employees who acquire disabilities. My name is Laura Wilhelm. I'm the Executive Director of Disability in Chicagoland. To give you a brief visual description of myself, I am a white woman, middle-aged, with shoulder-length brown hair. I'm wearing a black sweater this morning, and I'm working in my home office. So I want to thank you all for sharing your time with us today to participate in this conversation. We're hosting the Disability Inclusion Opportunity Summit in recognition of Disability Employment Awareness Month, which is hosted every October. So I thank you all for sharing your time with us this morning. I also want to thank our sponsors for the session this morning, Comcast and Northern Trust. They've both been partners of disability in Chicagoland for several years, and we really appreciate their ongoing support. Their sponsorship ensures that we're able to make the session this morning. Thanks to Comcast and Northern Trust. So as we get started, I want to go over just a couple of quick housekeeping points. So the session this morning is being captioned. And you can view the captions if you click on the More button, which is probably at the bottom of your screen in your Zoom toolbar. When you click on the More button, you can then select Show Subtitles from the drop-down box that should show up on your screen. I'll share a transcript of the session as a follow-up. And I also just want to be sure that you know that we're recording the session this morning. I will share a link to the recording with you as a follow-up as well. We're going to leave some time at the end of the discussion for Q&A. Because we're using a Zoom webinar, you can send your questions through the Q&A button, which is also in your Zoom toolbar. You can send those as we go through the discussion today, and we'll do our best to get to them and answer as many as we can at the end of the session. So for those of you who might be a little bit less familiar with disability in Chicagoland, I just wanted to show you some of who our local partners are. We're the local affiliate of Disability In, which is our national partner, and we're all about building a business-to-business network to connect organizations around Chicago to help them better integrate disability into their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. Again, I want to give special thanks to our partners this morning, including Northern Trust, who has been a wonderful participant in our session in the discussion this morning. We really do feel very fortunate to have so many wonderful partners in the Chicago area engaged in this work with us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I feel very fortunate to be able to kick off the conversation this morning. So I'm excited about this topic, which focuses on opportunities to support employees after they acquire a disability. We have rehabilitation experts who are going to share ways that they engage with businesses in preparing individuals to return to work and support their ongoing employment. Panelists will also speak to their own experiences in working before and after acquiring a disability, tying in their perspectives on how to successfully navigate what can be complex corporate policies and practices. And our speakers are going to also leave you with some resources and information on how to successfully support employment and return to work for individuals with disabilities. So I also have the pleasure of introducing our speakers for today. First, I'd like to welcome Peter Yee. Peter is Executive Vice President at Northern Trust, working on the fixed income investment team with responsibility over global liquidity portfolio management. Peter joined Northern Trust in 2000 and has held leadership roles within global income portfolio management, credit research, managing teams between Chicago, London, and Bangalore. Peter is a frequent subject matter expert in fixed income with regular citations and television appearances on various media outlets like Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, CNBC, and Pensions and Investments. So thanks for being with us this morning, Peter. I'm also pleased to welcome in today's conversation Robert B.T. Treeweiler. BT is a vocational rehabilitation counselor who works with the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab and has over 30 years of experience in assisting people with disabilities and employers in the return to work process. He is a certified rehabilitation counselor and is active in research on job accommodations and return to work with a disability. So welcome, BP. And then rounding out our speakers this morning is Deborah Crown. Deborah is Research Operations Manager, Center for Rehabilitation Outcomes Research at Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. She's a certified rehabilitation counselor and Illinois licensed clinical professional counselor. She serves as the project manager for a rehabilitation research and training center for employment of people with physical disabilities. She has over 20 years experience working in vocational rehabilitation with people with physical disabilities and over 10 years of experience working in human resources and project management. So I'm really thrilled to have you all joining us today. I appreciate you sharing your expertise with us in this conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to Deborah to kick off the conversation. Oh, Deborah, I think you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, thank you, Laura, and hello, everyone. Again, my name is Deborah Crown. I am a white female with blonde hair, wearing a navy jacket and a cream-colored shirt today. I have a virtual background, which is the Sky Lobby at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and it is decorated in orange and white colors. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. For the agenda today, I will share some background information about disability and employment statistics, about a research center on employment for people with physical disabilities, about the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and I also will talk about the role of rehabilitation professionals in supporting return to work. Most of our time today, however, will be spent talking with Peter Yee and Robert Treeweiler about return to work after an acquired disability. And finally, we will share some resources and takeaways from today's presentation. To begin, the CDC reports that 1 in 4 adults in the US, that's about 61 million people, live with a disability. Individuals with disabilities on average earn 70% less than their non-disabled peers and are far more likely to be unemployed. Less than 20% of people with disabilities in the US report working. And according to the World Health Organization, almost everyone is likely to experience some form of disability at some point in their lifetime. At the same time, we are experiencing a current labor market shortage, with the US Department of Labor estimating that more than 47 million people quit their jobs in 2021 during the Great Resignation. So the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab was awarded a grant 4 years ago by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. The purpose of this research center is to improve employment outcomes for people with disabilities. We have been collecting information to identify the best practices and interventions to promote return to work and job retention. This presentation is supported by the RRTC on employment for people with physical disabilities, and we are pleased to present with Disability In and Northern Trust, who actually serve as advisors on this research center. So this is a picture of the outside of the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. And the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab has been rated the #1 rehabilitation hospital by US News and World Report for the past 32 consecutive years. Originally founded in 1953 as the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, The Shirley Ryan Ability Lab is considered a global leader in physical medicine and rehabilitation. We serve adults and children with the most severe and complex conditions, ranging from traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, amputation, cancer-related impairments, and many other disabilities. In 2017, we changed our name and moved into our new translational research hospital, which allows physicians, scientists, and therapists to work together in the same space. This enables our cutting-edge research to inform the rehabilitation care with the goal of helping our patients regain ability, better outcomes, and greater independence. In 2021, the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab served 50,000 patients from 47 different states and 44 countries. There are approximately 800,000 residents in the Chicago area who report having a disability. And I wanted to highlight that the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab has a vocational rehabilitation program which supports return to work after an acquired disability. Vocational rehabilitation services include one-on-one counseling, return to work evaluation and return to work assistance, job analysis, and navigating disability policies and workplace accommodations. The Shirley Ryan Ability Lab also provides assistive technology services to help people with disabilities accomplish tasks such as using a telephone or a computer with adaptive equipment to enhance greater independence. We also have charity care funds, which are available to people in need, and in a city where 1 in 10 residents are living in poverty, these funds provide access to all those in need. And this diagram shows examples of members of the rehabilitation team. They may include, but are not limited to, physicians and nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, vocational rehabilitation counselors, social workers, and psychologists. The entire rehabilitation team can play an important role in supporting return to work and in identifying accommodations which best meet the needs of the person with the disability. Each clinician brings specialized expertise to help the person with the disability identify strategies to meet job demands. And this slide shows some examples of how rehabilitation professionals can support return to work. So, for example, physicians document the need for job accommodations and can write the medical release for return to work. Nurses monitor ongoing health issues such as blood pressure, wound care, and can assess adherence to medication schedules. Physical therapists design therapy exercises to increase strength, endurance, and range of motion, and assist with mobility needs. Occupational therapists oftentimes will use simulated work tasks in therapy based on job descriptions and the job analysis. And they can also assist with preparing for a driver's evaluation, which is important for return to work in many cases. And speech language pathologists address communication needs, especially as they relate to the performing job duties. Social workers can provide supports and resources to address funding and medical needs for the person, and psychologists provide emotional supports and strategies. And vocational rehabilitation counselors work with the employer to assess the job demands in the work environment. They also work with the person with the disability and the entire rehabilitation team to assist with identifying and arranging for job accommodations and coordinating return to work plans and schedules. And this graph shows the results of a survey that was conducted to people with disabilities in the Midwestern states area. This survey was conducted under the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center grant on employment for people with physical disabilities. And you can see from the grant that the responses from people with disabilities clearly shows that they thought their clinicians were helpful in supporting their return to work and helpful in identifying job accommodations that would best meet their needs. Now let's move to the conversation of return to work after a disability with my co-panelists, Peter Yee and Robert B.T. Treeweiler.
So maybe I'll kick it off here. Thanks everyone for having me. I would describe myself today as middle-aged Asian man with short black hair. I'm wearing a white collared shirt with a blazer on, which my kids say I look goofy whenever I put a blazer on, and I'm working from my my office at home today. But you know, my journey really starts about 6 years ago. I was in a car accident that left me paralyzed as a quadriplegic. You know, I really didn't have the ability to move my hands or my lower body. I ended up with a pretty high level cervical spinal cord injury. And, you know, I woke up in an ICU and I spent about 4 weeks there, and then moved on to what is called the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, just to start a somewhat long journey ahead with rehab. You know, look, when you're going through such an unexpected life-changing event where you're almost left trying to relearn all the most basic body functions, it's just simply overwhelming. You know, the adjustment to a new normal, it takes time. With this constant overhang of how do you move forward? And that absolutely includes, what do I do for money going forward, especially when I was the source of income for my family. It's an enormous amount of weight you start to feel with that uncertainty surrounding financial security and a career. In some ways, it's part of your identity. It gives you pride, it gives you a feeling of accomplishment, and in many ways, just a healthy engagement with the community and, you know, of course, a sense of purpose. You know, quite candidly, it's not easy to visualize and see yourself rising to the challenge and have your existing skill sets fit perfectly, even in a job you've been used to doing for, you know, for me, for more than 15 years. You know, that said, I was very fortunate that my passion and technical expertise worked better doing investments for a company that operates on the service side of the economy rather than having something more physically demanding. But, you know, that's not for everyone. And what is kind of consistent with everyone is, you know, the big question becomes, what's the timeline for a return to work? You know, people spend years doing rehab to improve their quality of life. And if you start seeing significant gains in that regard, you should absolutely continue until you get the most recovery you can. But there's other situations where you want to start building a routine again and building on a professional career. But, you know, the reality is it is a little bit easier already having a profession that, you know, for me, I can lean on, you know, because those technical skills that I spent years developing are still there. But sometimes it starts to lose a little muscle memory the longer you're away. So for me, you know, I always knew I was going to go back to the same industry and employer. And any free time I had outside of rehab, you know, I was spending watching the investment markets, keeping up to date with my industry, because the world does change pretty quickly. And more importantly, I kept in touch with all my professional network, whether it's internally with Northern Trust or externally with my peers across the industry that I knew. I just wanted to make sure I had a clear picture of what was going on real time. You know, it is work, it's effort, but it was necessary for me, at least coming back, hitting the ground running. But again, for others, they may need more time just to process the new normal, get as much recovery as you can, and come back to building a career at a pace that works for them. Because like I said, it's overwhelming at times, and everyone kind of processes the new normal at a different pace. But one thing that I do think is important, it's about discipline, and everyone needs to develop a discipline, especially if you're looking to start a new career. Learn about the industries that interest you. Do as much research as you can on the industry and the employers within the industry that you admire. Build a network of people within the industry to help you understand what it's like, help you weigh the pros and cons. Tap into as many resources as you can. That's a key message. That's where vocational rehab services can really make a difference. You know, as you'll hear throughout this session and conversation, you know, I did use the Shirley Ryan Vocational Rehab Services with BT, who's also on this call. You know, he was a resource that worked very closely with Northern Trust to think through accommodations that, you know, I might need in my return. And that included looking at my workspace, coordinating with my employee relations team, and see what type of assisted technology tools I can use. And that range from desks that can be raised and lowered to, you know, special dictation and navigation software, you know, a more effective mouse and earpiece. All that makes a difference. And I did spend a lot of time while I was at the Shirley Ryan in the inpatient and outpatient facilities, just to learn more and more about assisted technology tools. Deborah, you know, mentioned it earlier. What are the tools out there? And it was really up to me to kind of use those tools or sample those tools to see what worked best for me. And it does matter what type of organization you're in or want to join. You want to join or be a part of a company that is going to set you up to succeed. And really, I think there's more opportunity today than ever. You know, considering the transformative social movements that we've seen over the last couple of years, but then also think about the opportunities today with regards to technology and how companies have learned the real efficiency benefits of remote working from home and the unpredicted extreme labor shortage that Deborah mentioned earlier. You know, we're all experiencing it all over the place. So the business case for disability inclusion has never been stronger in my eyes. And quite frankly, companies that get it, I think, will be enriched with new talent and partners that are just natural problem solvers. So let me kick it back to you, Deborah.
Well, Peter, your experience is very helpful in highlighting the opportunity we have now to ensure that disability inclusion is prioritized inside of businesses and large organizations. Can you share a bit about how workers with disabilities can think about a return to work?
Sure. So first of all, it's about find your passion. You know, I hope everyone can see this, but, you know, you don't have to feel like you need to take just any job. Just like anybody without a disability, you'll always be better at the job you have if you have that genuine passion for it. Search for your career. Make it a fruitful career as long as you put in the time and the effort, just like everybody else. But also, don't wait for things just to be handed to you, because it's not easy for anyone, disabled or not. You know, second, and I think this is very important, always be professional. Although you may feel like, you know, at times the world is against you, you'll get far more respect when you leave an impression that you take working seriously and have the professionalism and the class to understand that not every opportunity is going to be a good fit. And finally, you know, I would say be genuine and authentic. You know, more times than not, admitting that you don't know something and coming away with real advice to strengthen your background will only help. You know, sometimes it takes a ton of humility, but that authenticity is what makes you unique and gives you a different perspective on things that I think companies ultimately will value. But also be balanced. You need to be balanced with confidence in your skill sets and what you bring to the table. Absolutely don't compromise on that. And guess what? You know, people with disabilities tend to develop incredibly valuable problem-solving skills. And that's what we do every day. I drop my phone, I got to figure out how to get it. If there's barriers that prevent me from getting from A to Z, I want to remap and pre-plan, and these are all problem-solving instincts that I think make people with disabilities incredibly valuable. So with that, I'd offer that up, but again, pass it back to you, Deborah.
Thank you, Peter. So BT, we've heard Peter talk about his personal experience and connect it to the larger landscape of corporate America and the current labor market. He also laid out some context around ways for individuals with disabilities to think about their own careers. As a rehabilitation professional, and given your successful work with Peter and Northern Trust, can you share your experience in working with Peter and other clients to describe how rehabilitation organizations can support individuals return to work?
I'm happy to, Deb. First of all, I'm an older white male, gray white hair, glasses, mustache, which also is gray. Wearing a dark blue shirt, and I've got a virtual background. Kind of give a picture of me. So I think it starts like with Peter. The first thing we want to do is to actually talk to the person and see what are their goals, what do they want to do. If they're planning to go back to work, then I, as a vocational rehabilitation counselor, which is part of the team that would be working with the person, I would then, contact, where they, first I would talk to the person and get as much information about their job as I can, the different aspects of their job. What do they do? Is it physical? Is it cognitive? What activities do they do? What's their work day like? Where do they work? And then with permission, I can contact the employer, to follow up and also talk to the employer about their goal of having that person come back to work. And then look at, how can we facilitate this? Sometimes that involves I'll actually go to where a person works to look at the environment. In Peter's case, I had visited Northern Trust, saw his work area, got an idea of the environment he was working in and what he had to do. And then, talking with Peter in Northern Trust, it's a team approach. It really is only successful when everyone works together with the common goal of having that employee come back to work. And then as a team, you identify, what kind of changes need to be made? Do changes need to be made? What kind of accommodations might help the person? We look at expectations, both from the person, the employee with the disability, and the company, the business. When I work in helping someone return to work, my focus is primarily on the employee with a disability, but I'm also working with that employer to make sure that, their expectations are met, that that person comes back and is able to, perform their job tasks up to the expectations. They can become a productive member of that work team again, and allowing that person to really kind of just mesh back into the work environment that they had with minimal disruptions. That's okay, Deb. I probably talked enough.
No, thank you. Thank you, BT. So one of our goals for today's session is to share some concrete resources with our participants to support return to work for employees with disabilities. BT, from your perspective as a rehabilitation professional, can you talk about how you have seen the different partners in this process work together to support a successful return to work? And Peter, can you then follow up to share your perspective on how the collaboration can be successful based on your personal experience?
Well, to begin with, in Peter's case, Northern Trust was already very proactive with, employing people who had different types of disabilities. And not all employers are like that, because sometimes I'm working with someone and that company they're working for has never had an employee who had a disability. So it's a very new experience for them. And part of my job then becomes, helping them navigate what they're going to need, what resources are available. In Northern's case with Peter, like I said, Northern was very adapted doing this and had done it many times before. And so they actually made my job easy in the fact that they kind of knew, what the process was going to be. For a company who's never had a person with a disability, then, we talk about the process of having them come back to work, identifying accommodations, resources, what they need to do. But as I mentioned, it's a team approach where I try to get everybody involved. The HR, the manager of the person, the employee themselves. And then by all talking together, we figure out what's going to work. And Peter, do you have any?
Yeah, let me jump in here. Yeah, I mean, just like what's been talked about, there's resources for you.
Yeah.
In a way, you should let your guard down. Be open, of course, be authentic and realistic, but use them. Aside from more of the formal employment resources that, we've talked about, one thing that I think is really important is networking. Join industry groups, use LinkedIn, follow companies that you admire on LinkedIn or Twitter, use social media to your advantage. Get yourself out there and talk to people and ask them what they do. I think the most valuable resource you can utilize is finding a mentor. Preferably someone in the industry that, that you desire to be in, but, that mentor can be from the disability community or not, but someone who can look at your authenticity and help you brainstorm, play out the demands of the job, help you problem solve, potential barriers to overcome and scope out accommodations that are critical or even just nice to have. And maybe that mentor can be your advocate over time. I mean, look, at the end of the day, people are looking for a foot in the door. They want a level playing field where they can prove their skill sets are valuable. And that's no different than people without disabilities. And, when you're learning and thinking about these different companies, it's okay to ask questions about how they think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Chances are for the stronger companies, you may be able to find statements or commitments on how these companies are creating opportunities for advancement for workers with disabilities, just simply looking at their websites. Ask about diversity resource councils or even corporate board initiatives surrounding inclusion. Does the company have a chief disability officer? In my view, every Fortune 500 company should have an inclusion mandate and a chief disability officer to ensure consistency across the organization, really from the top down. Then, look at other factors or other resources that, these companies provide, like training, flexible working options, and of course, mental well-being policies. Those are all things that I think are best practices, and those are the ones that define really good organizations with strong, inclusion practices. And again, I said this earlier, you want to be with a company that is going to set you up to succeed, give you the tools and the resources to be successful and build a career. So, those are my thoughts.
To add to what Peter said, I also make sure, especially for a company that has not had a person with a disability come back to work, are they aware of the resources? Because Peter's right, there's a lot of resources out there, but sometimes people aren't aware of them. Where does a company go for information? I mean, I can provide that information, but I also make sure they realize there's others like the Job Accommodation Network or Disability In, that can help them, because just like the employee wants support and wants to be knowledgeable, employers are kind of the same way. They want to support their employee. They really are rooting for that person. But if this is a new area for them, they need reassurance. They need to know that other companies have done this. And sometimes I'll just say, yeah, the such and such company did the same thing we're asking you to do, and it was highly successful. And they need that reassurance too. That's why I keep coming back to it's a team approach with a lot of communication. And then if somebody has a question, we need to answer that and find the resources, because the resources exist. It's just linking into them. And at the end of the presentation, we will give some resources to everybody.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, BT, it's absolutely a team approach. One of my very strong views is if companies don't embrace, inclusion, they're going to be left behind. Think of the business case that, we always kind of talk about in terms of what it's like to tap into this rich source of problem solvers and, very disciplined, good workers that have amazing skill sets. The business case around the labor shortage, this is an untapped, resource that, companies can really benefit from. And here's some good statistics from an Accenture study that was done a couple of years ago, which, I think it's an enormous proof point for the business case. And that's, companies with disability inclusion priorities are growing sales 2.9 times faster than their peers, and profits 4.1 times faster. To me, you think about all that, and it's a pretty compelling business case for more and more adoption of these best practices, and working collaboratively with organizations like the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, just to get that that flow of talent and consistently looking for this community of workers that again are going to add to the bottom line just by being there and adding a diverse skill set.
I would agree. Yes. Deb, do you have any other questions for us?
I do have, for Peter and BT, would you please identify one or two takeaways you would like to share with the audience today?
Peter, you go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I'll start with, if you really want it, you still have to work for it. Use that passion to fuel what I like to say an obsession. Network and find mentors that can offer perspective through multiple lenses. I said this earlier, maybe this person is disabled or not, but has unique insight into the industry. That's the foot in the door, and those mentors, I think, are incredibly valuable for success in your career. So that'd be I guess, my first takeaway or recommendation. And, I think my other piece of advice is the time is now. Again, especially with this labor shortage and the acceptance and adoption of companies, having permanent remote working from home, this should really open up a lot of new doors for opportunities. And like I kind of mentioned before, it does level the playing field. So if you have a passion, if you really want to get into an industry or a job, the time is now to really refine your skill sets and really get yourself out there and network and really take advantage of the time right now, the window.
To build on what Peter said, with opportunities, job accommodations really enhance opportunities for people to do their job. They allow them to show their talent, to really assist the company in meeting the bottom line. And job accommodations aren't scary. They don't cost a lot of money in most cases. Sometimes they're very common sense, but they allow that individual to flourish and to, do their best for the company. And then for the company, that adds to their productivity, their profit. Peter would say it far better than me, being a financial person, but I just think that don't be afraid of offering opportunities to employees who might have a disability. And really, there's so many ways to modify things. And that's a lot of what I do. And, sometimes people are amazed. Oh, wow, that was amazing. But it's there. It's, the road's been traveled before by people, and there's places to learn about it.
Well, thank you, BT and Peter. We have 3 more slides just to cover briefly, and then I think I've seen some questions come through. So Laura will share those questions with the panelists here.
Well, this is a slide. Oh, sorry, Deb. Didn't mean to
No,
talk
go
over
ahead,
you.
BT. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is just a list of some very common resources, and I believe this will be available. Laura's going to send these PowerPoints out so people don't have to furiously write, but Disability In is a great resource, the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, Job Accommodation Network, the Great Lakes ADA Center. These are places that you can go for information on offering opportunities to employees with disabilities, about job accommodations. These are really some of the best resources around. And if an employer or a person with a disability, I would strongly encourage them to visit these sites and learn the information they have. And then I think we have a slide on takeaways. Oh, so from my perspective, key takeaways are communication, using the team approach, and being flexible. That's what I find from my perspective and what makes it work for everybody. Peter, do you have any observations or comments on these takeaways?
BT, I think those are really good takeaways. The communication is just absolutely paramount. And the more and more you can use these resources, the better. And the accommodations that companies will, largely be able to offer, because to your point, BT, some of it isn't super expensive technology. It's just things that make your everyday normal routine just a little bit easier. But I think the main takeaway out of all of this is be flexible, be open-minded, and use the resources that are there. They're there to help you. They're there to guide you. It's good to have those best practices. companies continue to work with organizations like Disability In and the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, just to kind of better understand how you can help people with disabilities. So I think those are good takeaways there.
Thank you, BT and Peter. I totally agree with your key takeaways, and I would just kind of reinforce that each job situation and each person is unique. So flexibility really does help, and be creative in terms of looking at job accommodation options. So from the panelists, we would like to say thank you for the time today to share this information and Peter and BT's experience. I just wanted to let any certified rehab counselors in the audience know that if you would like to receive 1 credit hour of continuing education, please email me at dcrown@sralab.org to obtain your certificate. And now I will turn it over to Laura to address any questions that the audience might have.
Thank you, Deborah. And a big thank you also to BT and Peter. It's been incredibly helpful to hear your perspective and to get some of your ideas on resources and opportunities. So we do have a few questions. The first question that we received says, as a remote worker, nearly all of my opportunities for training are provided by third-party training platforms. Many of these platforms over-leverage images and video. Being totally blind, this is not just unhelpful, it's an active disincentive to begin a training course on these platforms. How much time will I waste before I come across something that makes meaningful progress impossible? How can we drive home the importance of ensuring third-party platforms have the same commitment to making their services accessible?
So maybe I'll just take a quick shot at this. BT or anyone else can kind of follow up, but it's really up to the employer to be scrutinizing some of these outside vendors, because it's all about differentiating, and it's all about there's plenty of vendors out there that can give these employees training. I think it's upon the company to find the ones that can be more creative around solving some of these challenges for people that have disabilities. Like, if they're blind, there should be an alternative way that they can get that information. That would be my view. Otherwise, it is a challenge, and I do sympathize with some of those just things that just haven't really been developed yet. But the more pressure a company can put on these vendors, I think the better the outcome. It just might take a little time.
I would agree. I think that, the company needs to step in. Hopefully they're aware of the fact that these training platforms are not accessible to the people who are using them, all the people who are using them. And they need to partner with that person to demand that they become accessible. You can consult some resources like the Great Lakes ADA Center or the Job Accommodation Network, but I do think it begins with both the company and the employee, agreeing that, wait, this isn't working. We need to join together and demand that this be made accessible for everyone.
Look, and I would say if companies don't speak up, then it's just going to take that much longer.
Right.
So I think it is a best practice to, have them be accountable for better tools to address disabilities.
Yeah, and I guess if the employees in the Chicagoland area, I would offer one more resource, and that's Access Living in Chicago. They have a communication specialist that's really wonderful, and I would think she could also give some guidance in terms of accessibility.
That's really helpful. Thank you all. Another question that we got says, it's been great to hear Peter's story and the ways he has successfully navigated his return to work, specifically what he did. But what advice, Peter, do you have for the organization to prepare teams for new and different relationships with colleagues with disabilities?
So when I kind of mentioned earlier that I think every Fortune 500 company should have a chief disability officer, that's the role that also provides training, specific training for teams in terms of what inclusion means. And inclusion means maybe you have to communicate a little bit differently with someone that has, hearing issues, or maybe you have to communicate a little differently if someone is blind. Or again, I'm a quadriplegic and I have paralysis, and sometimes there are more comfortable settings for me to be in, and sometimes there are more uncomfortable settings. But just being open and understanding that people just communicate in different ways. And there should be training modules out there that should be overseen by the chief disability officer that helps everybody. And the last thing we need is uncomfortable situations. Let's be open, let's be transparent, let's talk about it as adults and as professionals that have a common goal of being successful. So that's how I would, I guess, think about it a little bit.
That's great. A third question that we got was, what if a disabled person goes back to work, but the company's not as supportive as the person originally thought they might be? Should the person work with the company to get the accommodations they need, or should they start to look into a new job or company?
So,
Well, if I can begin, I guess the first thing would be to work with the company. In my experience, a lot of times the company, this is a new road for them, and they may not be very adept at what to do. So I would, work with the company, bring in an outside resource if you can to help the company. Realistically, if it looks like that street's a dead end, that you're not going to get that support, then unfortunately, maybe you have to start looking around to see if there are other companies that, are going to offer you a good opportunity. And there are great companies to work for if you have a disability. But yeah, I guess I would say work with your company. Realize that, if this is new to them, a new learning experience, they may need somebody to mentor them or to come in and provide assistance. What do you think, Peter?
yeah, no, I agree with you. I would say it's hard when you have a company that may not be as supportive. To me, that just is a red flag that they're really not setting you up to succeed and giving you the tools to do that. It's scary sometimes to leave, your comfort zone, which is maybe the company that you've worked with for years and years. But right now we're in a hot job market. Just kind of visualize what it looks like to, be at a competitor that will support you. There's no harm in just looking out, using your network, and maybe there's a better fit somewhere, because again, if you don't have the tools to succeed, it's probably not going to be a great place for you in the long term. It's scary, it absolutely is, but be confident in your skill sets, look at what's out in the market, and make a good decision from there, an informed decision from there.
And I think this, is why companies want to strive to be as inclusive as possible because they could lose a very talented person by putting up barriers or not being supportive for whatever reason. And then the person is going to go and find a company that does support them. And so, it's a loss. Maybe that person will do better, but then the original company has a loss. They've lost a valued member of their team. And, you don't, I mean, I would think you'd want to try to keep all your employees who, can contribute. And really, accommodations are not scary. They're not expensive. They're not highly disruptive. Some of them, I use the word common sense. They're very common sense things that people hardly notice. It's not, ripping down walls necessarily and, doing all kinds of, I can come in and make suggestions, that are very cost effective or hardly cost anything, and yet can make a tremendous difference in allowing that person to, meet the expectations.
Thank you. So we've gotten a lot of questions. So clearly you all have really engaged in a really interesting and productive conversation. Another question that we received asks, how could we as a company potentially partner with Shirley Ryan and see if we might tap into clients that might want to seek out a new career with us, usually as a computer software engineer and with 100% remote positions? Deborah or BT, do you have any thoughts on that?
We do have the vocational rehabilitation services available. So our manager of vocational rehabilitation, her name is Lisa Helma, and we can provide her email address. I believe it's lhelma@sralab.org. So I think that would be a good place to start. BT, do you have other suggestions?
No, Deb, I think, reaching out to Lisa and the vocational rehab program, they work with hundreds of people who have different types of disabilities and would be a great way. And, if we don't have someone that would fit that company's need, we could make sure they're aware of other resources in the Chicago area that also works with people with disabilities who might, I can think of a couple other organizations that work with, especially in the tech area.
Fantastic. And our panelists have all kindly agreed to share their email addresses as a follow-up. So in the follow-up email that I send you, I'll include their email addresses so that you could follow up with some of these specific questions as an easy next step. So I think we might have time for one more question. You mentioned that all Fortune 500 companies should have a diversity officer. Agreed. Do you see most companies having an accessibility officer or an office of accessibility?
So maybe I misspoke, but I was saying a chief disability officer. A little bit different than, a chief diversity officer. I do think there are a lot of companies that are kind of embracing like a chief diversity officer, and it's all in the spirit of, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But just in my experience for a lot of companies, I think the inclusion part, especially for those with disabilities, are a little bit lower on that list. And that's why I think it should be prioritized, or the decks need to be a little bit reshuffled, where maybe it just needs to be its own separate role. And a chief disability officer would probably be the chief accessibility officer, etc. But the point there is that role, that title, is someone that should be able to reach everyone from the top all the way to the bottom, being able to, articulate to the board what it means to have an inclusive policy. And, one of the things that, BT and Deborah kind of just reminded me of is, I have a lot at stake here in this conversation because I'm also a hiring manager to some degree. Whenever there's open opportunities in the investment world on my teams, and let me tell you, I think it's easier to find accessibility tools in trying to help these people with the experience succeed than it is to go out to the market and find a replacement, train them, the costs involved there. I mean, if we're talking dollars and cents, to be honest, I think it's actually a much better risk reward staying with that experienced individual and helping them with tools to succeed.
Yep.
And that's gonna, entail accessibility tools.
I would agree.
Agree.
Well, I have us right about at the top of the hour. And so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And so just to wrap things up today, I first want to give a very big thank you to Peter, BT, and Deborah for sharing all of your expertise and your personal stories with us this morning. It has been a really impactful discussion, so thank you for sharing your time with us today. I also want to thank our participants. I know you have a lot of asks of your time, and so I appreciate you sharing the last hour with us. Thank you also to Comcast and Northern Trust, to our sponsors. Just as a reminder, as Deborah shared, this session has been pre-approved for CRCC credits for rehabilitation counselors. And I will share Deborah's email address with you again in the follow-up materials I send if you'd like to request credit for that. And I just really want to quickly let everybody know that the final session of October's Disability Inclusion Opportunities Summit series is next Tuesday. We're hosting a networking session to connect students with disabilities in and around Chicago to some of our corporate recruiting partners who are trying to increase their pipeline of students with disabilities. So I'll share follow-up information about that in the email I share as well. So thank you again to everyone for your time today. It's been a great conversation. I hope you all have a really nice afternoon. Take care.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.